Good afternoon. Thank you for coming. Original talk, actually, I just wanted to delve a little bit into predestination and actually thinking about why people behave the way they are. So I started to dig this in, and I ended up with looking at history, because most of the, as you know, most of the events or actions or behavior we have or characteristics we have is really learned. It's not really innate. And by reading behind literature, I found out that the culture has a major influence in our behavior. And one of the emphasis in the Baha'i religion, or the first actually prerequisite to gain into the knowledge of the Holy Spirit, is basically independent investigation of truth. If you assume that you know something, then obviously you're not going to look for something contradictory. So the key was this thing was emphasized everywhere I saw. So then I started to say, look, let's look at these assumptions that have been culturally inbred into our thoughts. And we've been growing up with them, and we never examine those, and we don't know actually where they came from. So I started to look back a little bit, and obviously because we come from the East, most of us have Islamic background. And as you know, Islam itself has more than 72 different sects and branches, although many of them related to the two major Sunni or Shia. But overall, it's a very diverse ideas and diverse thought that has gone into this 1500 years history of Islam. And of course, as you know, the Bab, which is the precursor to Baha'u'llah, which is the forerunner of Baha'u'llah, came from this, he was descendant of Muhammad. And I have actually a certain slide which in Quran it actually emphasizes a youth from Hashemite branch is going to bring you a new book, and you should actually believe in it and accept, which is quite intriguing actually when you go there. So I thought, then I started to put these things together, and obviously, as my background is mathematics, I try to take natural sciences or psychological sciences and that currently exists regarding description of human behavior, and was trying to match this. So as I was accumulating these things, it became quite interesting that I saw that obviously human behavior has cultural background, and the new manifestation has came in, had a very interesting dilemma, because majority of the writings that came from God through manifestation was really allegorical, from Moses to Jesus to Muhammad, and that's the reason actually they survived. If it wasn't, it wouldn't even survive. And ironically, after, for example, 10th or 11th century, Sufism was the cause of progress of Islam and spread of Islam across many, many different lands. And interestingly, prior to European colonialism, Islamic territory was 3 times larger than Christian territory. So it was quite dominant up to maybe 150, couple of hundred years ago. So it's quite intriguing in terms of looking at history. So let's look at the dominant culture and go back and see where, examine actually Baha'i roots, where it came from. So here, the dilemma actually was that now that Baha'u'llah came in and he's brought us in objective religion, how would you bridge between what was allegorical? How do you translate an allegorical language? And at the end, you end up with an objective language. So that methodology is in 7 Valleys and 4 Valleys of Baha'u'llah that really explain this particular process in the methodology that in Quran actually is mentioned that truth is one, foolish made it many. So this is quite intriguing actually, even in Quran this is mentioned that really the meaning of truth is one. And who is the authority that can translate Holy Spirit or Book of God? Obviously, the next manifestation does that. So this is really the journey, and then, so I split this, and I didn't want to take too much of your time. Last time we were here, more than an hour and a half, and people were tired. So I split this into actually 3 sessions. So this first segment, it really examines this particular culture that we inherited generally, and where it's coming from overall. So it's interesting when we hear things, and this is very important to decipher the language that you're hearing. So the words that comes out of someone's mouth has to be matched against the dictionary that is supplied. And I played the trick here, so you see hypocrite and hypocrite. You know, it sounds the same, right? It sounds the same. Now let's see if I'm not, most of us don't bother. We have heard hypocrite as someone that is not a good person. But ironically, these 2 words have completely opposite meaning. So Hippocrates was a physician, a Greek physician, and he's the most outstanding figure in the history of medicine. He's referred as a Western father of medicine. So he has a very, very, this Hippocratic oath that you hear physicians do, that means that in no circumstances you cause patient harm. So that's Hippocratic oath that comes from this hypocrite. So here, again, clinical medicine, summing up the medical knowledge of previous schools and prescribing practices for physician to Hippocratic oath, or corpus and other works. So this is who hypocrite was. Now, hypocrite means hypocrisy is act of persistently pretending to hold beliefs, opinions, virtues, feelings, qualities, or standards that one does not actually hold. So hypocrisy is thus a kind of a lie, right? So hypocrisy may come from a desire to hide from other actual motives or feelings. You see, these both words sound the same, so you have to be very careful when we read a Baha'i document. You have to use Baha'i dictionary. Otherwise, you end up someplace else. So this is very, very, you have to be very, very careful in terms of not take the assumptions of the meaning of the words, because our culture defined those words completely differently. So you have to be very careful when you do that. Now, in terms of Baha'i doctrine, there is 3 main separation of spirit. One is essence of God, which is unknown, and it has its own sphere, which is obviously simple. That means there's only one. It's unique. There is no 2 of them. It's not composed, and it's self-caused. Nobody made God. So this is the essence of Creator. Now, prophet's souls also is simple, so it's not complex. It's pre-existent. That means that it existed. It didn't become manifest at the time of conception as humans are. So prophet's soul existed before. And that is one of the reasons that when prophets speak, they speak about past and future like they've been there already, or they're coming from it, or they were talking to those prior prophets already. So how could it be possible? The only way that it can be possible is that their soul is actually pre-existent. So, but we come to man's soul, which is really, it's simple, it's new. That means it becomes manifest or emanates from God at the time of conception. That particular person doesn't exist. That soul gets created at the time of conception. And it's perpetual. That means that this soul never dies. This emanation has to be emphasized. That means it's a handwriting. It's not piece of God. And I'm going to emphasize this, explain this later on, because Sufism tends to really play a little bit on this particular concept of maybe collectively consciousness of the entire world creates God, actually, which we're going to describe that a little bit later. So this is really the sphere of God or world of God, which is called Hahut. And in the next session, I'm going to describe these world and what their meanings are and why they're called that way. But for the time being, we're just delving into the history of Baha'i religion. Now, there is a place which is world of kingdom. So there are three distinct worlds. One is Hahut, or where the essence of God is. The other one, where the essence of prophets are, which, as we mentioned, their soul is pre-existent. And then there is a segment which is world of creation. This world of creation is called Jabarut, and this is where actually prophets communicate with God. This is nothing to do with Malakut or Nasut, which is really world of existence, which is Nasut, and Malakut is where our soul goes after passing. We're going to describe this later on. I just wanted to give you a distinction so you see that no one can cross these boundaries. So prophets operate in all of these spheres. God operates in all spheres. But man only can go into Malakut and Nasut. That's how it's basically designed. So progressive revelation, which Baha'i religion promotes, really starts from Adam, and this comes from Muhammad, which he describes that Adam was a prophet, and he believes that he had a book, and he had followers, and up to Muhammad. So all of the prophets between Adam and Muhammad is recognized by Muhammad, by Islam, as people of the book. And their book is holy and is accepted to Muslims as holy book. And of course, after Muhammad, Bab and Baha'u'llah, which signs and prophecies in Islam points at coming of these two manifestations in general. But something quite important in this picture, and it's really from time immemorial, you're looking at the two segments of the religion itself. One was actually allegorical in terms of signs, in terms of interaction. The other one was fixed. That means that since time of Adam, it really hasn't changed. What are those that are common across all religions that hasn't really changed? Those are virtues or attributes of God. What are they? Let's say love. You have, help me, justice, right? grace, right? So these are characteristics or virtues that are common across all of these religions, and they are, no human is born without capacity to improve themselves in that sphere of a spiritual realm. So it doesn't matter who you are, how much education you have, or your innate or inherited characteristics. You may be a very good mathematician or very bad at math. Has no impact whatsoever for you to be able to achieve or augment your spirit related to attributes of God. So the common element across all of these religions, no manifestation came in and say, you have to kill your fellow man, or commit atrocities, or hate somebody, or hate a group even. So there are emphasis in these two segments, and the first segment, of course, it changes as time goes by. And a lot of signs have been allegorical, and that is the reason, for example, Christianity even survived. Because they could take these language, which are mostly parables, and try to adapt to the condition that they saw. And they stretch Christianity in general. Ironically, when you look at, for example, the basis of the Western culture really came from Renaissance that occurred in 17th century. Ironically, in the West, it is it's not known that essence or basis of Renaissance was Islam, had nothing to do with Christianity. The scholars from Europe, especially priests, came and studied in Spain school and learned the art of government from Muslims, and translated a lot of scientific books from Islam to basically Greek and Latin, and brought it back to Europe, and separation of church and state occurred through these teachings that came from Islam. Ironically, Islam subsequent centuries went the other way. And we're going to describe that a little bit later. So this is really the whole key. Up to now, these were allegoric. That in the time of Baba and Baha'u'llah, because maturity of humanity reached a point that they didn't need a translator. That's the reason in Baha'i religion we don't have any priest. So how could you do not have a priest and then have an allegorical language? If you had, then you would end up with many different versions of the religion, right? So the language has to be objective. That means anyone that reads it would come up with the same conclusion. Now, this is really where the marriage of science and religion comes in. That means that there is no conflict between science and religion, because revelation, which is Holy Spirit, completely matches or complements sciences. So it's part of the same reality in general. So this is really where Baha'u'llah's job was so difficult to do. How do you get people that are used to allegorical language and have someone else translate things for them, suddenly take responsibility of reading it objectively and understanding what it says? And this is where the 4 values and 7 values comes in. But for the time being, it gives you a perspective of these progressive revelation, generally. So this Islam split into 2 major sects, and the first day that Muhammad put his head down, this split occurred. Because tradition in Islamic law was saying that the elder of the tribe would be the leader of the tribe. And obviously Muhammad, at the time of Muhammad, he mentioned and he lifted Ali and said his son-in-law, that he would be his successor. So this particular division occurred right after Muhammad's passing. where ironically Ali, which was his son-in-law, eventually he became a Khalif anyways, but not the first one. And the key division occurred right at that time. That descendant of the Muhammad created this sect, Shia sect, which obviously had 12 imams that came, all descendant of Muhammad and Ali. So that is really Shia, which constitute descendants of Muhammad, and Sunnis, where basically elders were the leaders of the religion, as well as leaders of the state. And this is, you have to be very careful to comprehend it. So a Khalif, or let's say Ottoman Empire, not only they were the emperor or leader or sultan, leader of the secular society, they were leader of the religion as well. So this is really, now interestingly, from the beginning, because of this division occurred, and many scholars found discrepancies in terms of translation that were occurring and interpretation of many other scholars. And this Sufism came out because of these discrepancies that occurred. As you know, there are two major works in Islam. One is Quran and the other one is Hadith, which we're going to describe what they are. And all the jurisprudence came out of these two books, generally. But Sufism came out of, so Sufism is not shifted to Sunnis or Shiites. It's really a training of the soul. So this is mystic side of Islam called Sufism. Now, of course, in the areas of Shia and Sunni sect, there are theologians and philosophers. And we're going to describe all of these so you get a better idea of who these people are and why we end up with where we are. So here, in short, the Islamic scholars were divided into three separate areas. People that were interested in human interaction and laws that affected the human person. The other group was people that were interested in changing your mind, and of course Sufis, that they wanted to change your being, your soul. So these were the three major groups in the Islamic scholars. So people that focused their energies in guidelines for body, they were called them jurists or qazi. They were calling them qazi because everything had to have an interpreter. The second one, training the mind of correct understanding of laws of Quran. This was divided into three schools: a theology, which is really study of religious faith, that dogmatic writing that says this is how it should be. The second was philosopher, which basically they were looking at Islam and trying to logically describe what it is and trying to adopt it. And of course, Sufism, which was saying, no, this Quranic document that you see, most of it is really allegorical. It shouldn't be translated directly. So this last segment, which is really training of the soul, that means that through education, they want to change a person. Not change his mind, they wanted to change a person. And this is really what the differential is in Sufism in general. So Muslims who devote their major efforts to developing the spiritual dimension of the human person tend to be known as Sufis. So theology, let's define theology. Theology is study of God, or more generally study of religious faith, practice, and experience. That's theology. Philosophy is attitude to life or way of or principle of living whose focus is on resolving the most basic existential questions about the human condition. So this is really and generally relies on argument and reason. That's That's what they call philosophy. And Sufism is training the soul, compliance to strict Islamic law to achieve presence of God in this world. Majority of Muslims believe that they would see God when they go to the other world. Sufis believe that through this particular process of strict compliance with Islamic law, they can achieve presence of God in this world. So that's really what Sufism is. So what we're going to do is really look at Islamic text, Quran, Hadith, and jurisprudence that comes from these two texts, history of Islam and Sufism, Shia Islam and its Persian roots, Shaykhism, which came after Shia, which is fusion of Sufism and Shia Islam. And I'm going to describe that. And of course, Sufism is a bridge between Islam and Baha'i religion. Many people from other religions come to Baha'i religion through Sufism, actually, because the text of the actual Quran and methodology that is describing is so strict that doesn't allow any competition. It's a very peculiar environment, and we're going to see the event that had occurred and why you see Shiites, for example, are so against any other religion as opposed to their own. And of course, commonality. So, what is Quran? Is Muslims believe Quran to be the book of divine guidance and direction for mankind and consider the original Arabic text to be the final revelation of God. That is the reason, for example, the prayers 5 times a day, Muslims pray regardless of where they're born in the Arabic language. So the original text is very, very sacred to Muslims in general. So the most miracle of Muhammad was really Quran, which came out of a person that couldn't read or write, and he brought philosophy, even scientific discoveries that scientists at the time didn't know. And how could a person without capabilities of reading or writing be able to divulge this kind of truth without any interference from Holy Spirit? It was not possible. So Muslims believe Quran is the miracle of Muhammad. And of course, as we mentioned, Muslims believe Adam was the first prophet. Ibrahim, which is scrolls of Abraham, was the second one. Torah, Pentateuch, and Zabur, which is the book of Sabian, book of Psalms, and Injil or Evangel, which is really the holy book of Christians. So Muslims believe in those messengers of God as well as their book to be authentically came from God. Now, what is hadith? Hadith or al-hadith pronounced, it's called narrative, basically, or narration originating from the words and deeds of the Islamic prophet Muhammad. So this was actually gathered during the time of Umar. Anyone that had witnessed Muhammad saying or doing something, they would come and they would record his memory. And this really created hadith. So ironically, we're going to see some differentiation of validity of hadith between Shiites and Sunnis, general. And then schools within the Shiite religion that diverge a little bit from the original text of hadith itself. And the jurisprudence or judging of the case came from basically use of Quran and hadith. Now, the Muslim in general, their belief is this 6 item. And this came from Sheikh Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. Came from that book. These are 6 Islamic articles of belief. Belief in God, which is Allah. And by the way, Muslims don't believe that their God is different than Christian God or Jewish God. They believe in the same God. So this is really not contrary to Western culture trying to create division across these religions. None of them, including Christian, believe that they pray to the different God, by the way. So this is single God, belief in God. The second one, belief in all prophets or nabis and messengers, which is called Rasul, sent by God. Belief in angels, which mala'ik they say, and then belief in books, belief in books, kutub, sent by God, including the Quran. Fifth is belief in Day of Judgment, Qiyamat or Qiyamah, and the resurrection, life after death. So this is really very important because we're going to emphasize this 5th point and see where the challenges of, for example, Sheikhs came to Shiites. And of course, the 6th element of belief is belief in destiny or fate, qadar, whether it's good or bad. And this is really related to Sunni sect, that they believe that you have your future is written in a book, and you have very little to do with changing this particular process. And of course, in the Shia 12er Shiites, do not stress God's limitless power, which is qadar, but rather His boundless justice. So adl is very important element in Shiites' belief. Now, obviously, we're trying to narrow down and go toward the Baha'i roots, so we're going to examine more deeply the Shiite 12ers. And you have to realize that many of these imams that came in, obviously descendant of Muhammad, they created their own clan and their own followers. That's where Islam started to branch as well. That people that followed those imams didn't believe in the subsequent imam. So you have many different branches that came, of course, in Shiite religion as well. So what are these 5 articles of the faith? Tawheed, this means oneness of God. Adl means justice of God. Nabuwwah, which is prophethood of Muhammad. Leadership, which is imama, means that descendant of Muhammad should be the leader of the religion. And of course, Yawm al-Qiyamah, which is the day of resurrection. And this is ironically, when you read this, it's very similar to Judeo-Christian description of the day of resurrection. It's very, very close, generally. Now, what is Yawm al-Qiyamah, which is the whole division occurred between Shaykhis and Shiites was related to this day of resurrection and some other ancillary that we're going to go through a little bit later. So Yawm al-Din or Yawm al-Qiyamah is the final assessment of humanity. It's also named of the 75th surah of the Quran. The sequence of events, according to most common understanding, is the annihilation of all creature, resurrection of the body, and the judgment of all sentient creature. This is very similar to Christianity, generally. Now, we talked about the Usul ad-Din, which was 5, that means the major pillars of the Din. And then they have what's called ancillary or furu ad-Din. That means that these are laws that is not really very essential, but they follow it in Shia 12. Prayer, which you have to do 5 times. Fasting, Hajj, which is pilgrimage. Zakat, which is 2.5% saving to the poor. Khums, 20% saving to which first half is Sahmul Imam, and this is where the problem starts, must be given to Imam of Ahlul Bayt, which is the Ayatollah. Now you see that this cultural process created a dynasty in Shia Islam. So here, as you see, 10% goes to the Ayatollah al-Uzma and whoever, or the Imam, Sahmul Imam. So you see what kind of power these people could yield if obviously Muslims will follow their own religion. Jihad, and this is ironically, Westerners have completely altered the meaning of this struggle, which had nothing to do with wars. Jihad means that you have to continuously improve yourself. And this is what it means. And ironically, everybody translated to and painted Muslims in different directions, which has nothing to do with what jihad is. And Amr bil Ma'ruf, which enjoining is good. That means that whatever in Quran says it's good, you should do it. And Nahi az Munkar means that don't do things that says don't do. So enjoin what is evil. Don't do things that are evil. Okay? And of course, Tawala, which is to love Prophet Muhammad and his Ahl Bayt. So this is you never betray them. This is the, obviously this is really where the difference of Sunnis and Shias are, because really Sunnis believe that Muhammad came in, he brought Quran, which is the word of God, and we really don't need any of descendant of him telling us how to read Quranic book or how to translate it. So that was really major difference. Now, obviously Sufism came out of the Shia and Sunni doctrine, and majority of it is because people couldn't reconcile actions of the priest or mullahs or clergy with what the Quran was saying. And remember, the problem was that in the Islamic doctrine, Khalif and the head of the religion is one and the same. So all those atrocities that were occurring in the name of Khalif, or it caused people to look for another avenue, trying to translate the book, because they knew the book came from God, and they couldn't reconcile it with the actions of the clergy. So Sufism really came out of this concept that really let's study, and there are many different doctrines in Sufism came about, and ironically that was the source of spread of Islam, was Sufism generally, which we're going to describe a little bit later. So, sorry? Basically, right. And ironically, Sufism, there were studies that were done recently, I have some reference to it, that if Sufism wouldn't catch on, Islam wouldn't spread the way it did. And ironically, was a major source of defending against European imperialism, was Sufism, generally. So these people were called sometimes Darwish, sometimes Sufis. Now, if you look at one of the major branches of Sufism, which is, this is tomb of Jalaluddin Muhammad Rumi, which is, he was one of the famous poets of Iran, and they say he wrote Quran in poetic Farsi. So he translated the entire Quran, described it in the poetic language. And he has many, many followers, and you see this is his tomb in Turkey today. And they have, he's one of the most famous, I think, in the West, as far as the poets are concerned. So what are the basic views of Sufism? While all Muslims believe that they are pathway to God and will become close to God in paradise after death and after final judgment, Sufis also believe that it is possible to draw closer to God and to more fully embrace the divine presence in this life. So this is, and now they're going to describe how you're going to do this, basically. The chief aim of all Sufis is to seek the pleasing of God by working to restore within themselves the primordial state of fitra, which is innate human nature. That means that you reach a point that whatever you do would be aligned with will of God. You reach that point. And they say that essence is in every one of us, that you can reach that point. Obviously, we don't believe this as humans because we can't be a manifestation of God. Only manifestation of God can reach that point, that they're omniscient at will, that what they do is the will of God, not every human being. But this is just a minor disagreement we have with Sufis, generally. Now, ironically, this state is defined in Quran, but this is really reference the manifestation of God. So in this state, nothing one does defies God, and all is undertaken by the single motivation of love of God. So you love God so much that whatever you do is aligned with His will, generally. And this is really where the abandoning of the dualism or individualism comes in. That means that you reach a point that you yourself don't exist. And you're basically exercising Quran. That's what you're doing. You have no will of yourself. So spread of Sufism has been considered the definitive factor in spread of Islam and in the creation of integrally Islamic culture, especially in Africa and Asia. Recent academic work on these topics has focused on the role of Sufism in creating and propagating the culture of Ottoman world and in resisting European imperialism in Africa and South Asia. So between 13th and 16th century Common Era, Sufism produced a flourishing intellectual culture throughout the Islamic world, a sort of golden age whose physical artifacts are still present. So at the time, and look at the centuries, this is exactly the time that Europe was in dark ages. They were completely backward. People, scientists in Islamic culture were curing cancer. Breast cancer, for example, was known to them. Medicine has progressed so much, sciences had progressed so much, and they had flourishing both ecclesiastical doctrine of teaching as well as governmental processes that were in place of how and commerce and so on, and this really caused their societies to flourish. And of course, golden age of Islam. Now, in this particular process of Sufism, they require a teacher called murshid, and of course a pupil. So every pupil has to have a murshid in general. And you have to have a correct creed. So there are creeds within the Sufism culture. So there are certain tenets you have to comply. So the seeker must also, of necessity, turn away from sin, love of this world. You have to detach from the world, the love of company, and renounce obedience to satanic impulses. So all your wants has to be washed away, and the prompting of the lower self. That means that whatever your individual need has to be set aside. Now here, as you see, the seeker must also be trained to prevent the corruption of those good deeds which have accrued to his or her credit by overcoming the traps of ostentation, pride, arrogance, envy, and long hope, meaning the hope for a long life, allowing us to mend our ways later rather than immediately here and now. And this is very important, which is really diverges from the concept of Baha'i religion, which says that you cannot reverse the damage you caused. You better make sure this action that you perform, you can never erase it. You can be forgiven for it, but that action, consequences of the actions that you do, it's always there. It's not a punishment, but there are consequences of our actions. It's going to be carried by us wherever we go. So these are divergence from these particular areas. Now, how do you acquire knowledge? Obviously, you have to have a teacher, you have to have the right creed, you have to find a master of the way, and they truly believe that this particular process is not going to occur by you reading a book. So if you read a Sufism books, you will not become a Sufi. You have to, this process goes from heart to heart. And this is really some of the misconception that a lot of us have, that you have to learn, for example, the new manifestations laws from another person that knows it better. And you have to realize where this is coming from. These are all remnants of the Sufi practice that exists in the East, which obviously this is completely different in Baha'i religion. We're actually promoted and mentioned to read ourselves all the time. Consult, and obviously we need to seek knowledge of learned people as well. But this particular process is completely different. Why? Because the language is allegoric. The language of Quran is allegoric, where the language of Baha'i religion is objective, generally. So scholars and adherents of Sufism are unanimous in agreeing that Sufism cannot be learned through the book. And that's why a lot of people think that if I do what my murshid does, or guru or priest does, I'm absolved of responsibility of my action because some learned person told me to do it, therefore I'm safe. Right? So this really, you see where these things are coming from. So this is in Quran, and it says, and this hadith is attributed to Muhammad, that says there are three things. One is Sharia, which is traditional Islamic law. Tariqa is method of applying it. And of course, Haqiqa means the interior state, that you reach the truth through that. So these are really description of Muhammad talking about himself, generally. And what, basically, this is, the tariqa is the pathway, and then Sharia is the main road, and of course, these are really description of, they have many different stages of wayfaring, that means traversing that road of Sufism. So there are many, many aspects about this God, and eventually you reach perfect Tawheed, or oneness of God. Which ironically, if you look closely, they truly believe that really that piece of God, it's in every one of us, and if we attempt to resurrect it, eventually we reach that point. And what happens is that God is defined as collective consciousness, or that innate characteristic that is in every one of us, which is really a Panteic doctrine, which had nothing to do with regular religion in general. So now we're trying to come up with the problems that occurred in 19th century in Iran. And of course, as we all know, Mahdi, al-Mahdi, which is the absent 12th Imam, what we call Messiah, where all the Muslims are waiting for. And this is really the crux of discussion today, of what is the meaning of this in different sects of Islam and what are the references to it. So usuli, there are two major branches in Shia 12ers. One were usulis. Their difference with their much smaller rival, which is akhbaris, is that the akhbaris favored use of ijtihad, reasoning in the creation of new rules for fiqh. So this usuli said, look, this hadith that you're looking at is really not all authentic, and it's because it may be translated incorrectly. Now we need someone which is basically mujtahid to translate this and have a final say at it. Where usulis really didn't believe in this hierarchy. The akhbaris didn't believe in that. They said, no, hadith is there, we need to read it and execute it as is, and it's authentic. So these were the two major factions, and so usulis didn't believe that this particular hadith is all reliable. And of course, they wanted this mujtahid or religious authority when seeking to determine Islamically correct behavior. Now, the usulis believe that this hadith of varying degrees of reliability and the analysis was necessary to assess their authority. So this is in contrast to akhbaris, where basically the source of law was Quran and hadith and nothing else. Now, where the Shaykhi and the challenge that Shaykhi came to usulis. Now we're talking about this 19th century, and someone by the name of Sheikh Ahmad Ahsai created a school which really in 1826, his successor was Sayyid Qasim Rashdi, whereas Akhbari school differed from usulis principally in matters of ancillary. So there were really minor changes that they had between them. When basically Sheikh Ahmad came in, he had a major problem. So he caused enormous uproar in that particular environment. This Shaykhi school formed so the difference principally in usuli principle is evidence that some of these leaders of the usulis were trying to quench this Shaykhi doctrine as well at the time. But let's look at the religious scholars. But generally, Shaykhis or Sheikh Ahmad Ahsai believe the principle of that fifth element that we were discussing, the Yom Qiyamat or Day of Resurrection, is really allegorical. So what he did, he morphed Sufism and Shia Islam and said, look, all those spheres or stars that are going to drop on earth at the time of resurrection is really allegorical, is not material. Where all Muslims even today believe that that event will occur. It's a catastrophic event that the whole world would disappear. But so this was a major blow, fraction in the Shia doctrine, where someone was challenging their primal belief. Both Sunnis and Shiites, which was this Shaykhi school generally. And ironically, both of these usuli and akhbaris believe that the continuation of interpretation of those laws were necessary to address any kind of question that would come up as far as the Islamic law is concerned. So they required interpretation and reinterpretation of these Islamic law as far as the hadith is concerned. So this process of ijtihad means that people studying and trying to translate it was a major, major industry, basically. That people would go in there and there were, in Rome, there were schools that were preparing people, really just in their lives, they would study this hadith and Quran, trying to come up with solutions to the problems that were coming up. Now this marja, Shia clergy, or marja dini, and this is very interesting, they were the authority after Prophet and Imams to translate or interpret those laws. So this marja became very, very important in terms of their doctrine. Now, what the problem they have with Baha'is is exactly this, because we don't really believe in this, that somebody else has to be interpreting for us. So these are major, major problems that they had with sheikhs as well at that time. So Shaykhism started with Sheikh Ahmad Ahsai, which is major difference was this Article 5, Yom Qiyamat, or Day of Resurrection with Shia. So this end time or Day of Resurrection, which was a major difference, and ironically, majority of Shaykhis basically became Babi and Baha'i later on, and this particular Shaykhi population is, right now there is some in Iraq and there's some of them in Pakistan actually. There's still Shaykhis around at that time. Now, what is eschatology of Shaykhism is basically this 12th Imam that disappeared in Shia Islam. They were believing that this particular person would come, the Mahdi would come, before the day of judgment and fill the earth with justice and make the truth triumphant. And this is a messianic figure and it's called Mahdi. Sheikhs believe that since Muslims require the guidance of Mahdi, there must be an individual on earth who is capable of communicating with him. And this personage would be described as perfect Shia. So the key really was that Sheikhs believed that really there must be somebody that can talk to this person that went into a well centuries before and is going to come back again. And this is really, they were looking for that person. Some say that even Sheikh Ahmad himself declared that he's that person that can talk to the 12th Imam. And I haven't really found a good source for that. And of course, Sayyid Kazim Rashti was the successor, and he, at his time, they truly believed that the condition of the Day of Resurrection had occurred, because now we're going to describe what condition that was. That these guys were looking because they knew that the Mahdi is going to come. Now, there are 7 majors in this. This is, of course, in Quran and Hadith. There are 7 major signs of Yom Qiyamat. One is appearance of Al-Masih al-Dajjal. This is really the Antichrist, actually. That means the false Messiah. Ad-Dajjal is said to be a beast who will come claiming to be God, holding heaven and hell. So that's the first belief. Second one is the appearance of Yajuj and Majuj, which is 2 hidden tribes of people. These tribes were these believing descendants of Prophet Adam. They will come in enormous numbers and will outnumber all the believers of the world. They will break through a barrier that Allah created to hold them back and ravage the earth. You see some resonance in Christian theology. It's quite intriguing, actually. The third one is the appearance of Dabbat al-Ad, the strange beast. The Dabba is a strange beast who will have the rod of Moses and the seal of Solomon. He will call people back to Islam. The fourth is the 3 huge earthquakes. that is going to occur. One is West, East, and Middle East. Fifth, the smoke will appear during the end time and cause believers to catch something similar to common cold, whereas disbelievers will be hit harder. Finally, a cool wind will cause all the believers to die. This leaves, wait. This leaves all the unbelievers. This is very similar to Christian theology. Unbelievers left alone on earth to experience the last hour of the day of judgment. Now, the seventh one is return of Prophet Isa or Jesus. So they're waiting for Jesus to come at that time. Authentic narration indicates that one of the major signs in that prophet Isa or Jesus will descend from the heavens in Damascus. Prophet Jesus will be the one to lead the believers in the battle against the forces of Dajjal, which is the Antichrist. It is said that he will break the cross, disassociate himself from Christianity of the day. That means it shows that Christianity has disappeared, actually. Now, these are minor signs. So we saw the major signs. Now you see why. Basically, Sheikh Ahmad was saying, look, these signs are really allegorical. It's not literal. So let's look at the minor signs that the Muslims are waiting to occur when Messiah comes. And this is in Al-Hadith by Al-Ashari. When it will be regarded as a shame to act upon Quranic injunction. When you cut somebody's hand today, people are shameful, right? You're applying Quranic law. It's shameful to do that. When untrustworthy people will be regarded as trustworthy, and trustworthy will become untrustworthy. Nobody believes clergy are really straight, right? When the liars will be regarded as truthful, and truthful will be regarded as liars. When women with children become displeased on account of them bearing offspring, and barren women remain happy on the account having no responsibility of these offspring. When decision will be given on mere conjecture, it's a wild guess. When legislation in matters pertaining to my right, religion's right, is handed over to worst element in my ummah. And if people accept them and are satisfied with the findings, then such person will not smell the fragrance of Jannah. When the offspring become a cause of grief and anger to the parents, when Islam will become a stranger, unwanted religion. Yes. This is in Quran. It's, yes, Al-Hadith, right. This is, they say Muhammad said these things. This is not, it's authenticated through a hadith. Sorry? Well, this was collected after Muhammad's passing by Umar. Anyone that had, I think, two witnesses, they would write those saying and actions down. This becomes very interesting. Right, right. When malice and hate will become common among people, when Islamic knowledge, ilm, is lifted, that means that nobody cares. They don't, it loses its effect. When people will boast upon their palatial mansions, when oppression, jealousy, greed become the order of the day, when lies prevail over the truth, when people dispute over petty issues, when people blatantly follow their passion and whim, when immorality overtakes shamelessness and is perpetrated publicly. You see all these signs, right? Now, What does Quran says regarding who's going to come? Let's see what Quran says. Who's going to come? Who is this Mahdi? In Awalem, an authoritative and well-known book is recorded. A youth from Bani Hashem shall be made manifest, who will reveal a new book and promulgate a new law. Then follow these words. Most of his enemies will be the divines. In other passage, it is related to Sadiq, son of Muhammad, that he spoke the following. There shall appear a youth from Bani Hashem who will bid the people plight fealty unto him. His book will be a new book unto which he shall summon the people to pledge their faith. Stern is his revelation unto the Arab. If ye hear about him, hasten unto him. How well have they followed the direction of the Imams of the faith and lamps of certitude, although it is clearly stated, were ye to hear that a youth from Bani Hashem hath appeared, summoning the people unto a new and divine book, and the new and divine laws, hasten unto him. Yet have they all declared the Lord of the being an infidel, and pronounced him a heretic. And this is regarding Bob, basically. They hasten. No, this is different. No, this is that one is, that's different. I'll share with you that. But this was, I just wanted to target basically youth from Bani Hashem, which is Bob, basically. So they predicted this. This divine manifestation, except they hasten unto, not unto that Hashemah light, that divine manifestation, except with drawn swords and heart filled with malice. Moreover, observe how explicitly the enmity of the divines has been mentioned in the book. Yes. No, these are extracts. Avolem means actually, this is extracts from Hadith itself. This is scholars that have extracted this information. Now, so the Islamic doctrine, the divergence really occurred in basically description of those celestial bodies in Quran at the time of end, which are those stars that are going to fall on earth. He said that those are allegorical and it's not literal. And this was a major blow to really doctrine. It's like going to Christians here and say, look, Jesus' body didn't go lifted up. I mean, they will kill you. I mean, this is the basis of the religion in general. So this was similar aspect as far as the Sheikh Ahmad is concerned. Another thing which was quite intriguing was his references to the tree of manifestations, which also, and tree of, he separated the branch of humanity from the branch of the prophets of God, which is, these are allegorical references, and this is really the fusion of Shia Islam and Sufism that diverge and describe that really the essence of manifestations are different than the essence of humans. So it doesn't matter, and he was very critical of Sufis, because he said, look, it doesn't matter how much you pray or starve yourself to death, you cannot reach the stage of a manifestation. And this was very quite interesting, that how divergent his so not only Shiites were against him, Sufis were against them too. So it was quite interesting, although he fused it together. Right. So here we say Shia sect theologian literal end of time, Sufism, mysticism, which was saying that these end of times are really allegoric. And of course, Shaykhism, which Sea of manifestation, end of time allegoric, and the resurrection was imminent. That he saw the sign, and the society had deteriorated. Now they were looking for that Messiah to come. And this is where the Baha'i and Babi and Baha'i religion started. Now, Abdul Baha's description of the Sufism is really, he describes the difference between emanation and manifestation. Manifestation is when you're actually your created person, which is that ancient soul of a manifestation, appears in a body of human. That is called manifestation. Emanation is when you paint a particular picture. Although your art is in the painting or your handwriting is in a poem, but not piece of you is inside that element. And this is really where the difference of Sufism and Baha'i religion is. They believe that really we are manifestation of God. That means a piece of God is in us. So it's a pantheistic religion in general. And Abdul Baha described this fully. So the Sufis admit God and the creatures and say that God resolves himself into infinite forms of the creatures and manifests like the sea, which appears in infinite forms of the wave. These phenomenal and imperfect waves are the same thing as the pre-existent sea, which is the sum of all the divine perfection. The prophets, on the contrary, believe that there is the world of God, the world of the kingdom, and the world of creation. These are three separate things. And this is really what the difference is. Yes. No, of course. The Baha'i religion, Quran says this is coming of Mahdi. These were basically learned people at the time that saw the signs. And ironically, they had people that were studying in their schools. And that's why, for example, Sheikh Ahmad sent all his disciples out to find actually Bab. And the Huruf-e-Hay, which are 19, including Bab, were Shaykhis, basically. That they were looking for, and they had to find Bab by themselves, and not through another person. And this is exactly what happened, generally. Well, it's a different issue, but obviously that was a literal interpretation, and the Romans were saying that this is King of the Jews, and basically the divines were saying is that what kind of king is this? He doesn't have an army, he doesn't have a sword, and he's poor. So what kind of king is he? So, no, of course. Right, this is choosing of, we can discuss that a little bit later. So generally, 7 valleys and 4 valleys, and this is the subject of next topic that we're going to do, is that imagine Baha'u'llah at that time, where majority of people, majority of Muslims and scholars had believed in this kind of allegorical language, and trying to direct their attention and bring them, translate their own literature to bridge them to an objective religion. How could you train a mind that is believing that they need a divine to interpret things for them to an area where this power of interpretation is given to the individual, power of understanding to be given to the individual. So this is really where the 7 valleys and 4 valleys comes in, which is really describes a path or wayfaring of a person going from that stage to reaching the goal. And this is really the description that we're going to go hopefully next time in there. So this is really the subject of next time is from allegoric to objective religion, journey of Baha'u'llah from mystical to objective, transformation of religion into non-paradoxical coexistence with science. So that's the next subject.